Hey guys, welcome back to the Better Not Bitter podcast. I am your host, Maya Warren, and I'm excited to have you guys with me yet again. Today we have another special guest, but before I introduce him, please like, comment, subscribe, tell a friend to tell a friend, share all those wonderful things. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and drop the brand new intro. Are you picking up what I'm putting down? I'm on a mission, hope to my line of vision. Are you picking up what I'm putting down? I'm on a mission, hope to my line of vision. All right, guys, I'm excited. We have a new guest. He is a man who lives with chronic illness and lives to make an impact and advocate and just spends a lot of time outdoors in the community, boots on the ground, trying to make an impact. Without further ado, I'm going to let him introduce himself.
Hey, Maya, good to see you. Thanks for having me on. It's a privilege. My
Thank
name's
you.
Steve. My name's Steve Schwier. Sorry. Yeah, I live with a chronic illness, a debilitating chronic illness called Meniere's disease, and it's very little known. It falls under the rare disease world, so not a lot of people have heard of it, including some in the medical profession. So
Mm,
it makes life a little difficult. You know, when you have an invisible illness, it's rarely seen, rarely heard about, rarely talked about. So I appreciate you allowing me to have this spot to talk about what I go through daily and weekly and yearly. Meniere's disease is something I came down with about 10 years ago. It started with just a ringing in my left ear out of nowhere, and it was horrible tinnitus is what it's called, is tinnitus. And the ringing started, and I had that for about a year. And after dealing with that for a year, I started getting vertigo attacks and daily dizziness and nausea. I've lost all the hearing in my left ear, and my right ear I have hypercosis, which is sensitivity to sound. I also have sensitivity to light, so a lot of times I'll wear special glasses for that to filter out bright lights because that can make me very dizzy. I have vertigo attacks sometimes, which are horrible to live with. You know, the fear of having a vertigo attack is one of the things that causes tons of anxiety with people with Meniere's disease. So anxiety on top of all that physical stuff. I also deal with a lot of emotional stuff due to my illness since I can't do a whole lot. I also stress a lot. I have self-worth problems, self-esteem issues, you know, not being able to provide for my family, stuff along those lines. So the emotional stuff is just as hard as the physical stuff. But yeah, that's Meniere's in a nutshell. It's kind of like living car sick every day, depending on what level that is. But yeah, it's something that I've grown to navigate, and I've grown to manage in a way where I can get out and do things and start advocating. And once I decided to start advocating, it just kind of became a purpose for me and gave me a new meaning to how I live. You know, I live sick, but I try to manage in a way that I can advocate for the Meniere's community. That's very important to me.
that's awesome. And I just want to say thank you for being transparent and vulnerable enough to share the realities of what you live with in terms of Meniere's disease. I think a lot of times we kind of feel the pressure to be okay all the time or
Mhm.
mask our pain or our symptoms to make other people comfortable, but ultimately that does more harm to us on top of the physical symptoms. So thank you for sharing that. You mentioned that advocacy is something that is important to you as a result of having this debilitating condition. Could you talk about what were the events that led you to advocate with Meniere's disease?
Yeah, it pretty much started about a little over 2 years ago is when I started advocating publicly. I spent pretty much the first 8 years of dealing with this disease. I lost jobs. I lost job after job over the first 5 years of being ill to where I couldn't even work and had to go on disability because it's just physically impossible for me to hold down a steady job with the um what's the word I'm looking for, the coming and going of my symptoms causes me to have days where I couldn't work, or I could work till 10 in the morning or till noon and have to go home. So I can't think of the word I'm looking for. I'm explaining
I
it
think
weirdly.
it's under the category of a dynamic disability, something that changes.
Correct, correct. And minute to minute, hour to hour, I can feel right now. I feel really good. I feel pretty good. But in an hour from now, I might be laying down with my eyes closed in a dark room, just riding it out for a few hours till I feel good enough to get up and maybe get something to drink or whatnot. So the thing with Meniere's disease that made it difficult is there's so many different levels of the disease, and I don't want to say stages, but at first it's very scary and confusing to have Meniere's disease because you don't know what's going on, and it could take years to find out what's wrong with you, and those are scary years. Then once you find out that you have Meniere's disease, then it's a crushing blow because you find out that it's chronic, it's lifelong. I'll live like this the rest of my life, and starting to manage it. So there's a whole process, and then grieving my old self and the things that I couldn't do. I've spent years grieving and going through depression and figuring out what the new me is going to look like and what can I do with the new me. So becoming an advocate didn't happen for a long time, because if someone would have said you need to start doing A, B, and C 5 years ago, I would have said no way, I can't. Physically I couldn't do it. But through 8 years, I was able to manage myself enough that I was like, okay, I don't see anybody. There are people advocating for Meniere's disease out there. There are people doing research. There is stuff going on, but I couldn't find anybody that was really giving hope and inspiration to the Meniere's community. So that's what I kind of decided to do. And I created a foundation called OntheVertigo, but it actually started out with just a simple bike ride that was 1,400 miles. I posted it on social media and got a really good following and met a lot of great people and realized that, maybe I could make a difference with this OntheVertigo thing. So it kind of became my slogan was, OntheVertigo. So being an advocate, I don't really advocate hard for exercise. I don't advocate hard for medical research. Those are things that are very, they're important to me, but I wanted to advocate to the Meniere's community personally that there is someone out here that is challenging themselves. And I wanted to inspire the Meniere's community to keep reaching to become a better person with Meniere's disease. That may be riding your bike across the country like I've done twice to create awareness. It could be getting up and taking a shower today. That's a simple thing. OntheVertigo, it doesn't have to, I don't want to represent, you have to go out and do something super huge. For the Meniere's community, sometimes getting out of bed and walking around the block is something huge. And so I'm not advocating go out and ride your bicycle 1,400 miles and post on social media, and that's how you survive or that's how you become healthier. That's not the case. I want to advocate for the simple things that people, they lost passions, they lost things they loved. And so I like to inspire people to maybe pick up a paintbrush again that they haven't done for years and years, or start writing a book, or doing art, doing exercise, riding a bike if they want, anything, just to inspire them to do anything that will help them feel a little bit better about where they're at with their disease. So that's the goal of my advocacy.
I think that's so dope, for lack of a better word, because um, not only are you out here doing something, you're not doing it in the hopes that you're trying to pressure other people into mimicking
Yeah.
you. You're
Yeah.
doing it with the hope of showing people, like, hey, I know this is difficult. I live with this condition myself. But whether it's, waking up, opening your eyes in the morning, or riding across the country, like, to find joy or purpose in something, despite the heaviness of chronic illness. So I think that's very beautiful, because a lot of times, some we get into this thing where we feel like if we're not doing the most extreme thing, and not to say bike riding across the country is extreme, but we feel like we have whatever in our minds is the most extreme, grandiose thing that a person with a chronic illness can do. We think we have to do that in order to feel some sense of purpose or achievement. But sometimes it's in the seemingly mundane small things that we find at least some semblance of solidarity or serenity. I know for me, I told a mentor of mine, like just being able to get out of the house and sit in a car and ride around. Like
Mm-hmm.
those are things that I used to take for granted. But living with vestibular migraine, like I don't take being able to get out of bed for granted anymore. Like
Yeah,
if
yeah.
I can make it to the restroom on my own, I'm doing great. If I can shower and do it for a legitimate amount of time, like I'm feeling great. I can like, travel to the front door like at all. I feel great because like I'm learning that, society has taught us to see achievement and success in one way.
Mm-hmm.
But it's easy to see success in that aspect if you don't have a loss of self, a loss of ability.
Yeah,
And so I'm always like congratulating people like yourself who find something like doesn't have to be exactly what either of us are doing, but finding something to keep you tethered to life. I think that can be hard sometimes. So awesome.
yeah. And you're, I'm sure, well aware of this too. I have enough people telling me what to do. You know, this is your cure. You need to do A, B, and C. You need to start doing yoga. You need to exercise. You need to eat better. You need, I mean, I've heard it every single thing over and over and over to where, the last thing I want my foundation, which we started after I did 2 bike rides and posted with the foundation, is not to tell people I don't have the answers to Meniere's disease, much less other chronic illnesses or invisible illnesses. I do know what helps me, and I'm willing to share that, but I know that what helps me may not help you with your vestibular migraines, or it may not help someone else with Meniere's. So the whole goal of OntheVertigo isn't to be a place where they come and find answers on how to fix themselves, because we're not fixable. So I live unfixed, and by doing the bike rides, I just wanted to draw attention and wave a banner that it's okay to be sick. It's not the end of your world. It's not the end of your life. There's going to be tons of changes. There's going to be relationships that drop. There's going to be relationships gained, for the better or worse. But I don't have the answers to fixing anybody. But if someone with Meniere's disease follows me riding my bike, and I can challenge myself enough to do that, then that's not an answer for them, but it might be an inspiration to get up and walk to the front door that day for them. And that's
Mm,
a victory for me.
that's awesome. And for those listening, I know you're probably like, wow, they're celebrating being able to take a shower or walk to the front door. What in the world is
Sounds
that all
stupid.
about? And so, Mr. Steve, I'm going to call you Mr. Steve because I'm from the
That's
South
fine.
and we say
That's
Mr.
fine.
and Mrs. But if you could just talk about the dynamic nature of chronic illness, especially Meniere's disease, how things aren't just a day to day occurrence, it's a moment to moment occurrence.
Yeah. The first thing I deal with is just waking up in the morning. When I wake up in the morning, my ear is just ringing off the charts every day. So I never go through a day where I don't think about being ill and having a debilitating illness, because it's ever present by the ring in my ear. Usually once I get out of bed, within 5-10 minutes, I can tell, how my day is going to start. And if I'm feeling pretty good, I might be able to run down to the grocery store, or I might be able to take a shower. But a lot of days I'll get up and know immediately that this is just not the day that I'm going to get a lot done. So I have a whiteboard in my front room that I write down all the things I'd like to get done, but I don't put those down as this is stuff I have to get done. And there's a big difference, because my old life, it was, what do you have to do? I have to go to work. I have to make a paycheck. I have to support my family. I have to, have personal hygiene, down to the simple things like you said. And with Meniere's disease, there's days where all that gets tossed out the window, and it just disappears. I have to just let it go and be like, today's going to be a day where I lay in bed or lay on the couch all day. And that's the only way I can survive that day. So I spend a lot of time lying on the couch, a lot of time distracting my brain because it's working so hard to figure out all the different things that are wrong with me. My brain, I think, gets so taxed that it just gets exhausted. And once my brain starts getting exhausted, then I start going downhill pretty quick, and I have to just rest. And so rest is my answer for most things when I start feeling bad. But yeah, I mean, my day might start, walking the dog, going to the grocery store, riding my bike for a few miles for exercise or just to get out of the house. But by the end of that day, I could be back in bed and just feeling like horrible. So it is moment to moment, and it's hard to explain that. It's hard for people to put themselves in our shoes, because if you've never spent 3 days just trying to get the energy to take a shower, then you don't know how hard that is. And anxiety comes with that. The water's going to hit my head and it's going to sound funny in my brain. Standing up that long or even sitting in a tub, I'm already wishy-washy, so I'm adding to that. Very, like you said, I used to take that stuff for granted, and I just can't do that anymore. So I don't expect anybody else to take that for granted.
Mm-hmm. That's such a beautiful point. I believe earlier this week I uploaded a YouTube video talking about the difference between sympathy and empathy. And the definition that I used for sympathy is kind of looking at someone's position or experience or circumstance through your perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas empathy is viewing that other individual's circumstances or experiences or situation through their perspective. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the times people conflate the two. They think telling you what to do or trying to be doctors without PhDs is helpful. They think trying to one up you in terms of pain. Like, I don't know if you've ever experienced this,
Yeah, yeah,
like, man, like I'm just extra dizzy or dealing with extra vertigo today. And someone will be like, "Well, yeah, I remember the time that I was so dizzy and I just
yeah.
zoned out." I'm like, "This is not that. Hush."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
And so when it comes to all of that, it can add to the wealth of emotions that come with not being able to do what our former selves was able to do. Um, and with that, it kind of, brings about a whole different expression of oneself, which is why you choosing to ride your bike and start a foundation for Meniere's disease and to highlight vertigo is so cool, because whatever you're able to do, it we tend to speak volumes even when we're not speaking as people with chronic
Mm-hmm.
illnesses, because most of us maneuver in silence.
Yeah,
But the fact
absolutely.
that you found your voice through doing this and starting this foundation um is beautiful, because many of us struggle to find our voices no matter what avenue we search it or look for it in. Could you talk
Mm-hmm.
about why um the specific experience of riding your bike across the country was the avenue you chose and how that came about?
Yeah, at first, when I decided to do something, I didn't know what it was going to be. I'm not an avid bicyclist. I'm not Lance Armstrong. I never wanted to be. I owned a mountain bike. I rarely rode. But with Meniere's disease, I knew I had to do something that would draw attention to what I was doing if I was going to make a difference or a splash in the puddle. And with the balance issues I deal with Meniere's disease, and pretty much any vestibular disorder has some sort of balance issues, riding a bike's difficult and it takes a lot out of me. But that being said, I knew that if I could do it, it would raise some eyebrows. It would draw attention to what is wrong with me and how I deal with it on a daily basis. And that's what ended up happening. So I pretty much picked a bike trip out of the blue because I thought it was one of the things that would be most counter to the way I live. I walk with a cane some days. I bump into things a lot because I lose my balance. I just fall over sometimes. So riding a bicycle, it's at first people with Meniere's thought it was ridiculous. They're like, there's no way you're going to pull off a trip of that magnitude. But I knew if I could do it and I could pull it off, what that would look like. And I wanted it to inspire people and be like, okay, he actually pulled it off. So, good for him, but maybe I'll challenge myself to do something. And that's how the inspiration of the bike ride came. And then after that, I wrote a book about that trip called On the Vertigo: One Sick Man's Journey to Make a Difference, which my brother helped co-write with me. And that book started selling, and people started getting my story. And so I did another trip, and I did another 1,400 miles. And after that, then the nonprofit came about. So it kind of started out as the first trip was just me challenging myself, not even caring who was watching or if anybody followed. I was doing it for my own self discovery. Can I do this? Because if I can do this, I can find out more about myself and how I'm dealing with this disease, and I learned to love myself again because I ended up really not liking myself and who I had become. So it
Mhm.
kind of was a catalyst for self-discovery. And so the first bike trip was very selfish and very personal. After that, when people seemed to respond to it, it was very easy to let the snowball start rolling into a nonprofit foundation and more advocacy. And it was a natural flow from the very first trip.
Wow, that's so cool how you went counter intuitive to your chronic illness.
Yeah.
I think many times we're tempted, especially on the onset of diagnosis, to kind of shy away from things that we perceive to be too big for us to handle. But you faced like literally one of your main symptoms head on by taking on that trip. So kudos to
Yeah.
you. That kind of inspires me to look at, okay, what am I been avoiding that is safe
Yeah.
enough for me to pursue? Because I
Hmm.
think with chronic illness, we develop more rigid comfort zones.
Hmm.
And so, even taking an assessment of what we still are able to do, uh, maybe whether it's through adaptivity, doing it differently, whatever the case might be, we develop such rigid comfort zones that we're almost scared to discover what we're able to do just as we are with our unfixed bodies.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think another thing that's very important is to me is helping people rediscover passions, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's passions they lost or new passions that they can find. I didn't grow up thinking I'm going to have a foundation that's going to do anything. That my goal wasn't that. My goal was to self protect. And when I got sick, I went into my bubble and
Mm-hmm.
went through depression and went through, I still deal with anxiety hugely, but rediscovering passions, I think, is very important, especially if you do have a chronic illness. A chronic illness is not going to go away. So, I can either throw in the towel and give up, which I still think about sometimes, to be perfectly honest, or I can look and say, what can I do that I could be passionate about now that will help me get through the next day? And so On the Vertigo became my passion. And so I can live through that. But that was not my goal growing up. And I've been married for 24 years. I have a 19-year-old son. I had a job. I had tons of friends. My life was going great. I was really, really in a great place. Then it just all came crashing down. So it's rebuilding myself from the ground up. And it started with the first bike ride.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And you hit on something that's very important and probably doesn't get talked about enough is the way that things kind of fluctuate. So one day you can feel like, wow, I'm just killing the game, so to speak. I'm making
Hmm.
it like, I will survive.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then the next moment or the next day, it'll be like, like I need a new body. I want a new head. I want a new brain.
Yeah,
it feels like
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
And for a while, I felt guilty for feeling that way.
Hmm.
Because it's like, man, I should be thankful. You know, toxic positivity, we have a way of
Yeah.
internalizing that after a while.
Hmm.
And so that's what I did. And I was like, but really, I mean, I think it's okay to, I guess, how can I say, grieve or acknowledge the deep, deep hurt and loss and frustration that you may experience from one moment to the next with chronic illness And that still means that you still appreciate, being alive in what capacity you are, but that doesn't take away from the reality of the pain that we're living in. And I think because we live in such a toxic positivity driven culture, people
Yeah.
get people are like, huh, when I say that, like, you can, grieve and still be thankful, or you
Hmm.
can hurt and still be healing at the same time. So like
Yeah.
it throws people off, but really, you know, it's not that hard of a concept to understand, especially when you deal with the loss of oneself.
And it's a process. You
Yeah.
don't just, I go forward, three steps forward, two steps back constantly. And I'm glad you brought up the word guilt, because guilt is probably the thing that eats at me the most.
Hmm.
Being sick for 10 years and losing so much, like you said, society says you need to do A, B, and C to be a man. So
Hmm.
I don't know what the differences between male and female are with chronic illness, but I know, being a man, that the guilt that we feel as men, not being able to achieve, not being able to attain the things that we're expected to, either externally or internally. Internally is where I deal with most of my guilt, because I just feel like I'm letting people down. I feel like I'm letting my wife down, and my son down, and my friends down, and I feel like I'm letting, you know guilt is just, it's something I deal with every single day. If I can't get out of bed that day, I have to battle the guilt of what
Hmm.
I'm not being able to do or accomplishing, and that tears me up a lot. It's a crappy place to sit, is in guilt. It's just a
Yeah.
very, very devastating. It's like jealousy. It's something that, it's just so toxic. It's so toxic. So
Yeah. And you bring up a really good point. Men and women obviously have different societal pressures.
yeah.
Um and like I can just see how that having chronic illness would reflect and kind of exacerbate maybe some of those pressures and that guilt. I know as a female, we have societal pressures, of course.
Yeah.
And as a human being as a whole, especially in American society, this notion that you gotta run yourself into the ground and grind and achieve
Hmm.
this, and put all this blood, sweat, and tears into everything. Well, I
Yeah.
don't have the
Yeah.
spoons to put blood, sweat, and tears into anything, honestly,
Yeah.
if I'm
Yeah.
being really honest. And for a while, I felt guilty about that. And a mentor of mine, who's also a pastor, a YouTuber creator, he does a whole lot of stuff. He says something to me that kind of got my edges. And when I say got my edges, it like convicted me in a good way. That kind of woke me up. It was like, if we're essentially called to be different, if God called us to be different, what makes us think that He can't use us just as we are? Like, and I
Yeah.
think sometimes for me, I think in the early stages, I was like, man, I was kind of acting like my chronic illness caught God by surprise,
Mhm. Mhm.
as if He didn't know that this would be the case. But He knew that He could still use me, and so I'm. There are times where I'm navigating guilt, um, especially in terms of feeling like a burden to others. I was
Yeah.
explaining to someone the other day, like when you have a disability or chronic illness, it's like it's a part of the package deal for some reason. Like everyone I
Mhm.
talk to, we all feel like burdens. You can have
Yeah.
best home life or the worst home life, and you still feel like a burden. And so
Yeah.
I constantly have to remind myself, well, like God can use me just as I am, even if I'm laid up in this bed. I can't move a muscle, but I can encourage someone with a text, or I could just sit there and watch comedy to turn off the pulsatile tinnitus in my ear. Like He can still use all of that. So I'm learning. I think it's, you brought up a good point, because it's a journey. Like nobody ever quote unquote arrives, and I don't believe anybody arrives until we're dead and gone, honestly, because we're always
Mhm.
growing, we're always changing, we're always learning, whether it's for better or for worse. And so I definitely get that guilt is a real thing. And my last point before I ask you another question is that another guest I had on here by the name of Dr. Karen, she has an organization called Empowering People with Invisible Chronic Illness, the Epic Foundation. And she said something to me that freed me up. And it was that the stages of grief are not linear. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of times we feel the pressure to make sure we're in a linear state and that we don't go back into stages of grief. But with chronic illness, whether you think you're on the other side or not, you're gonna feel acceptance one day, denial one day, anger one day, bargaining one day, and you just have to learn to kind of to navigate it in a healthy manner. And I think seeing what you guys have done through On the Vertigo, that's so impactful because obviously, to those of us who live with chronic illnesses, we know there's so much more under the surface of you guys even putting that together. There's the
Yeah.
physical side, there's the mental side, then there's the business side, then there's having enough spoons to deal with people side. So seeing that is very encouraging because it acknowledges the fact that life is hard, but let me try living well anyway.
Yeah. And I'm weak. I'm a weak person. I'm not someone that's, standing on a mountaintop saying, I'm going to change the world. I'm a weak person, and I have a spiritual mentor also. And before I even did the first bike trip, I was sitting with her talking, and I was just like, I don't know what if this snowballs into something that I can't handle? And she's like, that's
Mm.
God's worry, not your worry. You do what you
Ooh.
need to do tomorrow, and then whatever happens the next day. And she's like, it was like it freed me up. It freed me up to just take my hands off of everything and just see what happens. And as it's before my bike trip, if someone would have said in 2 years you're going to be running a nonprofit with your brother, I would have been like, hell no, I can't go. That's way too much, or you're going to be doing live podcasts with people all over the world. It would have just sunk me, mentally. I just would have been like, I can't handle that. But talking to her, realizing that I don't have to worry about that stuff. That's God's deal. I don't have to I don't have to even save Meniere's people. I don't have to do anything. All I have to do is wake up tomorrow, acknowledge who I am, acknowledge my abilities, and just see what happens and just let it go where it goes. And that's worked like a charm. It's made it so the bigger and bigger On the Vertigo gets, um, it's happening at a pace that I can handle because I don't care what's going to happen tomorrow. I just care about what's happening right now. Taking care of myself physically, taking care of myself spiritually, doing this podcast that's right in front of me, and that's all my energy goes right there. I'm not worried about a year from now. So
Yeah.
I think that makes it a lot easier to deal with that way. And I don't blame God. People are like, well, did you blame God for your no? It's God did not say, I'm going to curse you with this so you can make a difference. I'm going to put you in such a bad situation that people will see me through you. That's not the case. This wasn't God's plan. God is always for me, not against me. And can he use me through this? I hope he does. But that's not my decision. It's me being willing to just get up the next day and whatever's on my plate, try to do that. I don't play the blame game.
Yeah, and um I believe he already has used you just through our interaction. I'm encouraged just by meeting you. Um and then there's also this story in the Bible that I talk about a lot. It's in Corinthians, and it's when Paul is asking God to remove the thorn from his sides.
Mm-hmm.
Theologians believe it was either illness or something along the lines of that. Glad they didn't say what, because then people would have been trying to pick it apart.
Exactly. That happens
um,
all the time.
right. And then he's like, okay, remove it once, two, three times. And God says, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made
Mm-hmm.
perfect in your weakness. And that stuck with me because I notice if you look at throughout the Bible and if you look throughout, history, like God, if he doesn't remove something, whether it be an obstacle, an illness, situation, he often gives us strength
Mm-hmm.
when we need it most. I always say, like, God will give me spoons for everything I'm supposed to be doing and nothing more and nothing less.
Mm-hmm.
And I hold to that because now it's made me more intentional about how I connect with people, how I
Yeah.
even do things like this podcast. Like, I'm invested in this moment because I don't have enough spoons to worry about after this.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so even being more intentional in my relationships, and honestly, we know this is a journey and we have a long way to go, but I am thankful for every time I get to interact with individuals like you, and those who've been on the podcast before. On that note, there's a question that I ask all of my wonderful guests, and
Okay.
that is, what or who has helped you become better and not bitter?
Everyone who surrounds me. My family is one, my friends that don't have a chronic illness. The people I've met all over the world that communicate with me that have Meniere's or don't have Meniere's. I'm surrounded by a team of people, my brother Dave, my brother Brian, my sister Karen, my wife Emily, the board of directors for OntheVertigo, just everybody that allows me to be me in whatever state I am in at that moment is how I stay better, not bitter. Because I've lost a lot of friendships over this. I've lost a lot of self worth over this and stuff. So my friends and family that surround me and allow me to be sick is there's no amount of money that you can pay to get that. I mean, it's just that's the best blessing I have is the people around me that still believe in me, that believe in what I'm doing, that support what I'm doing, but the people that will sit with me when I'm sick and not expect anything from me. That is my biggest gift is being surrounded by people that allow me to be me in the state I'm in at that moment.
That
And
is
now you're
so.
now you're one of them. So
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. And I think that is so beautiful. And I'm just going to hammer on a point that you mentioned. I don't know if y'all heard it out there in the replay and in the live. It's the impact of sitting with someone and not trying to fix them.
hmm that's the
Like,
best thing that could happen for us.
that's one of the greatest gifts you can ever give someone with a chronic illness or disability.
Yeah.
On that note, sir, I want to give you an opportunity to kind of plug or mention your
Okay.
socials, your websites, any projects you're doing.
Um, yeah, if you want to track me down, my nonprofit foundation is at onthevertigo.org. That's our website, onthevertigo.org. If you want to find me on Facebook, it's Meniere's on the Vertigo. My Instagram is on the Vertigo, all one word, and you'll see now that you've seen my face, it'll be a picture of me on there. But come and follow me. We've got a golf fundraiser coming up in a couple weeks in Florida that we're hoping to raise some money for our foundation. I'm also got another bike trip in the back of my mind that I'm starting to work on, which I'm not going to talk about here because it's not set yet, but I'm working on it. I'll always have something in the future for us to look forward to here at On the Vertigo and to make a difference. And I just want to encourage everybody out there, chronic illness, no chronic illness, Meniere's disease, no Meniere's disease, it doesn't matter. But when you get up tomorrow, just think, what can I do that will just help me get through this day and feel a little bit better about myself. That's my purpose. So I want to inspire people to just do something small that will, at the end of the day, they can be like, man, I'm glad I did that. Wasn't sure if I could, but I did. And I pulled it off. And when you do that, pat yourself on the back and be super thankful that you were able to do it because it makes a difference in our mental health. So thank you, Mayia.
Thank you. I just want to again say thank you to Mr. Dave in the chat. He showed up and he said he was enjoying the podcast so far. And to those who will catch this on the replay, I want to say thank you to you, Mr. Steve, for being vulnerable and lending your voice, your time, your spoons to this conversation. I don't take that lightly with any of my guests, and you were the same. So, thank you again, everyone, and I will catch you on the next episode. Without further ado, remember to live better, to and
Live better, not better.
remember to become better and not bitter, one day at a time.
And peace out.